Have you ever wondered why you're so tired, even when you haven't done that much? Why your chest tightens every time your phone lights up? Why you feel like you're slowly leaking energy? Not because you're overwhelmed, but because you're constantly available to a world that doesn't care to know you. They taught us that being reachable is a virtue, that answering quickly means you're reliable, that being plugged in is a sign of success. But no one warned us what it would cost our stillness, our boundaries, our depth. The truth is, this world doesn't value depth. It doesn't reward silence. It doesn't slow down for someone who thinks before they speak or feels before they move. It's obsessed with speed, addicted to noise, infatuated with the next notification. And if you're not careful, you'll start believing that your worth is tied to how quickly you respond, how often you show up, how available you are to people who were never available to you. But you weren't born to be on call for a world that treats presence like a currency. You weren't born to explain your quiet. You weren't born to bend for people who only know how to reach, not how to hold. You were born for something deeper. And the second you start honoring that, the second you begin to protect your energy like it's sacred, the world will push back. It'll call you distant, arrogant, selfish. But let me tell you something most people are afraid to say. Choosing yourself is not selfish. It's necessary, especially when the world wants the parts of you it hasn't earned. So maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're just finally waking up, finally noticing that your constant availability was never love, it was programming, and now you're ready to uninstall. You see, not everyone deserves access to you. That's not arrogance. That's clarity. Because when you stop being available to noise, you start becoming available to truth. And truth is not loud. It doesn't shout over the chaos. It waits patiently, quietly. And most people never hear it, not because it's not speaking, but because they never stopped long enough to listen. We are drowning in connections, but starving for meaning, surrounded by people, yet more alone than ever. Why? Because we've confused being visible with being seen. We've mistaken being liked for being loved. And we've traded depth for attention, thinking the louder we are, the more we matter. But deep down, you know that's a lie. The ones who changed the world weren't always the loudest. They weren't the most available. They weren't scrolling all day, trying to prove their worth. They were focused, anchored, quietly dangerous, because they belonged to themselves first, not to the world. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But how can you become that if you're constantly performing for a culture that rewards the mask? You cannot heal while you're still addicted to being seen. You cannot grow while you're still bending to please what doesn't nourish you. And you will never become whole if you're always giving yourself away to people who only want fragments. So you have to stop. Stop answering every call. Stop explaining your solitude. Stop making yourself small just to be digestible. You are not here to be convenient. You are not here to be everyone's therapist, cheerleader, or savior. You are here to become something real, something rooted, something unshakable. And that requires withdrawal, not in fear, but in power. Pull back your energy from spaces that don't see you. Reclaim the parts of you that you handed out like free samples, because not everyone gets to witness your becoming. Not everyone has earned front row seats to your healing. Some people only show up to interrupt your silence, not to understand it. And that's where discernment becomes sacred. Because the moment you reclaim your time, your mind, your breath, you start remembering who you were before the noise got to you. You start hearing the whispers beneath the surface. The soul-level truths that don't need validation, they just need space. Solitude is not the absence of connection. It is the foundation of true connection. Because until you can sit with yourself without distraction, you'll never know who you actually are. You'll only know who the world told you to be. The curated self, the filtered self, the version shaped by algorithms, not alignment. But in silence, you start to notice the fracture. The part of you that's been screaming beneath the surface. The part of you that's tired of performing, tired of pleasing, tired of being available to a system that feeds on your disconnection from your own soul. Most people never face that voice. They drown it in dopamine, numb it with noise, bury it beneath busyness. But the truth is, until you confront the silence, you can't reclaim your center. And without that center, you're not living, you're reacting. Always adjusting, always appeasing, always abandoning yourself to stay inside someone else's expectations. But your rebirth doesn't begin in applause. It begins in refusal. Refusing to chase what doesn't see you. Refusing to keep betraying your inner knowing. Refusing to let your value be defined by how responsive you are to chaos. Carl Jung warned us. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. You can't awaken by outsourcing your identity. You can't evolve by staying addicted to validation. Growth is not visible to the outside world. It's invisible, internal, sacred. And so you enter the wilderness, the place with no applause, no audience, just you and your honesty. At first, it's terrifying because you're shedding the persona you've used to survive. You're dismantling the lies you once called personality. You're letting go of the roles that made you likable, agreeable, needed. But what you're building in exchange is integrity. And integrity costs. It costs connection with people who only liked the version of you that bled for their comfort. It costs belonging to groups that demanded your silence. It costs being misunderstood by a world that has never made room for mystery. But what you gain is yourself, not the idea of you, not the version molded by neediness or guilt, but you, the grounded one, the clear one, the one who knows how to walk away without bitterness, how to say no without apology, how to be present without being performative. And once you taste that kind of wholeness, you don't go back. The world will try to pull you back, not because it misses you, but because it misses the version of you that served its convenience. The you that over-explained. The you that showed up drained. The you that stayed in places long after your spirit left. But now, your silence is louder than your presence used to be, and that threatens the shallow. You're no longer giving emotional labor to conversations that lack respect, no longer attending every crisis that was never yours to hold, no longer lowering your frequency just to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you. That's not distance. That's discernment. There's a difference between being cold and being clear. And now clarity is your compass. You no longer perform intimacy just because someone shows interest. You no longer offer your story to people who haven't earned the right to hear it. Because truth without context becomes entertainment. And your depth is not a spectacle. This is where sacred boundaries are born, not as walls of defense, but as lines of devotion. You protect your energy not because you hate others, but because you finally love yourself. You finally realize that your time, your presence, your inner peace, they are not negotiable. They are not up for grabs. They are not discounts in someone else's marketplace of urgency. Carl Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. So when you begin to live from yours, they'll call you radical, difficult, intense. But only because your very existence reveals their avoidance. You become a mirror they don't want to look into. And so they'll project, they'll mock your boundaries, they'll accuse your silence, they'll say you've changed. And you have You no longer seek to be understood, you seek to be true. You no longer measure love by how much you give away, but by how deeply you stay rooted in integrity. You are no longer available to chaos dressed as urgency, to people who demand your light but flee from your shadow, to systems that reward obedience but punish authenticity. You've outgrown survival. You're no longer living from the wounds that once shaped your identity. You're not looking for someone to rescue you. You're resurrecting yourself from the inside. And when that version of you walks into the room, calm, clear, unavailable to drama, the whole energy shifts. Because real power isn't loud. Real power doesn't chase, it knows. And now, this is the turning point. The place where solitude becomes service, where silence becomes direction, where your healed presence is no longer just a boundary, it's a compass. You are no longer available to a world that doesn't value depth, because now you are aligned with something far greater, your purpose. Not the ego's fantasy, not the applause-chasing career, but the deep work, the quiet mission, the reason your soul was sent here in the first place. Because when you finally stop performing for the world, you begin to create from within. You begin to build, not to be seen, but because it would feel like betrayal to not bring it to life. You write because it's how you bleed truth. You speak because your voice carries medicine. You show up not to be praised, but because your very presence carries frequency. This is where the sacred begins. Purpose is not a product. It's not a strategy. It's not a checklist you find in a book or a formula someone sells you in a course. Purpose is the part of you that remains when the masks are gone, when you're no longer available for performance, when you are still, and the whisper finally speaks. This is what you were made for. And here's the paradox. The moment you become unavailable to shallow things, you finally become available to divine things. Real alignment, real connection, real creativity, real love. Not the kind that needs constant reassurance or sacrifice of self, but the kind that meets you in your wholeness and asks for nothing but presence. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But this is the threshold of purpose. It demands that you stop editing yourself to be palatable. It demands that you bring your whole truth, even if it disrupts the comfort of others. It demands that you choose alignment over approval again and again. Because legacy is not built by those who are constantly available. It's built by those who are devoted. Devoted to inner truth, devoted to something deeper than vanity, devoted to a mission that doesn't always make sense to others, but rings like a bell inside the soul." And so now your life becomes a sermon, not of noise, but of embodiment. You become the living reminder that it's possible to live differently, that it's possible to belong to yourself, that it's possible to protect your depth in a world that profits from your fragmentation. You don't need to explain it. You live it. You breathe it. And in doing so, you give permission to others, not by preaching, but by standing, calm, clear, unavailable to what drains and wide open to what calls. Now you move differently, not faster but deeper, not louder but clearer. You walk into rooms and shift the frequency, not by force but by presence. Not because you're trying to be powerful, but because you've stopped trying at all. And that is power. You're not here to fix the world. You're here to stop letting it fragment you. You're not here to shout over the noise. You're here to embody something that makes the noise irrelevant. Because in a world addicted to performance, your stillness is revolutionary. In a world obsessed with excess, your boundaries are spiritual armor. In a world starving for substance, your refusal to dilute yourself is an act of war. A war against the artificial, the hollow, the spiritually malnourished. You are no longer available to be drained, distracted, or defined. And yes, the world will notice. It always notices when a person stops begging, when someone stops playing the game, when someone decides that inner peace is worth more than outer praise. You will lose people, but you will find truth. You will confuse people, but you will finally understand yourself. You will be misunderstood, but only by those who never intended to meet the real you. Let him misunderstand. That's not your burden anymore, because now you are becoming untouchable, not by becoming hardened, but by becoming whole. Not by dominating, but by withdrawing your energy from the game entirely. You're not here to win a race designed to keep you small. You're here to opt out, to create something original, rooted, unshakable. And that requires becoming sacredly unavailable to anything that would rather consume your fire than protect it. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we exile to survive. But now you don't exile anything. You integrate it. You no longer hide your depth to be digestible. You no longer shrink your truth to be chosen. You bring the full spectrum of your being, the storm and the sun, and you let the world decide if it's ready. And if it's not, you don't bend. Because real love doesn't require distortion. Real purpose doesn't demand burnout. Real truth doesn't beg to be heard. It simply exists. And now, so do you, fully, clearly, without compromise. Your life becomes the rebellion, not through outrage, not through noise, but through grounded, unapologetic embodiment. You are no longer available to perform. You are here to live. This world remembers those who were clear, not perfect, not popular, not performative, but clear. People who knew who they were and moved like it. People who didn't beg for respect, they embodied it. People who didn't just speak truth, they became it quietly, relentlessly, with every boundary, with every no, with every choice to walk away from what no longer honored their spirit. That's the power you're stepping into now. You are not here just to exist. You are here to distill, to extract what matters, to cut through illusion, to move from soul, not pressure, from truth, not trend, from alignment, not attention. And that requires a devotion to something far greater than comfort. It requires a devotion to your future legacy. Because whether you realize it or not, you are leaving fingerprints on the next generation through every decision, every boundary. Every time you choose solitude over self-abandonment, silence over spectacle, integrity over imitation, you are creating permission. You are showing others, your children, your brothers, your sisters, even strangers, that it is not only okay to live with depth, it is necessary. This is not about rebellion for rebellion's sake. This is about repatterning history, breaking generational cycles of compliance, of performance, of constantly betraying oneself to be accepted by people who aren't even whole themselves. You are interrupting that cycle, not just for you, but for everyone watching you silently. That's the quiet violence of healing. It doesn't shout. It doesn't ask for permission. It just becomes something so real, so rooted, so radiant, that it forces everything around it to reconfigure. Your boundary is not a wall. It's a door frame. It tells the world, if you want to come into my life, raise your frequency. And those who are ready will rise. And those who aren't will fall away. And that is exactly how it should be. Carl Jung said, the world will ask you who you are. And if you don't know, the world will tell you. But now you do know. You've burned the mask. You've stepped out of the game. You've gone inward again and again and returned with a kind of clarity that cannot be bought, borrowed, or performed. And now you live from that place of quiet fire, of wordless conviction, of sovereign identity. You walk the world with fewer words, but heavier footsteps. Because now, your life speaks. It speaks without noise, without validation, without apology. You are no longer available to a world that doesn't value depth. And in that sacred withdrawal, you have become the very thing the world needs most. A mirror, a compass, a storm that knows exactly who it is and refuses to shrink. This is your return, not to the world, but to yourself. You are no longer diluted, no longer fractured, no longer renting your presence to people who only show up to drain it. You are no longer apologizing for your clarity. You are no longer shrinking to stay digestible. You are no longer over-explaining what was never meant to be understood by the shallow. Because now you remember your presence is not a product. Your silence is not a weakness. Your boundaries are not bitterness, they are the architecture of your becoming. You were never meant to be everyone's. You were meant to be yours, fully, fiercely, unshakably. And from that rootedness, you rise not as a reaction to the world, but as a revelation within it. You do not need to be loud. You are the thunder. You do not need to be accepted. You are already aligned. You do not need to be seen. You are witnessed by the very fabric of existence itself. So let them call you distant. Let them say you've changed. Let them write stories about your silence. Because what they'll never understand is that this withdrawal, this clarity, this sacred solitude, it wasn't you disappearing. It was you awakening. You didn't walk away to escape the world. You walked away to become something it could never consume. And now you walk with a different frequency. You speak less, but when you do, the air listens. You show up less often, but when you do, people feel your presence in their nervous system. Because you are no longer accessible, but unforgettable. You stop being available to a world that doesn't value depth. And in doing so, you've become the one thing it cannot ignore. The soul on fire. A boundary made flesh. A mirror that cannot be broken. A life that speaks in silence. And from this day forward, you never go back. Not to noise, not to begging, not to the version of you that thought you had to earn what you've always been. You don't have to perform anymore. You are, and that is enough. Always has been. Always will be.